What is up, guys? Welcome back to Better Plays Ahead, presented by The Game Day and all of our programs over at The Game Day HQ here. My name is Sam Wagman. I'm your host, as always, for Better Plays Ahead. And with me today and for the next few weeks as we tackle everything March Madness is our March Madness betting expert, Jeff Hicks. Jeff, how you doing today, man?
I am doing good, and I will just have to say that the word expert is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. But I appreciate the opportunity to come on here and talk some college hoops before the madness officially goes nuts.
Well, I mean, it is absolutely madness, and this is March because it's one of the best times of the year. We have our NFL offseason here, and, everything's kind of starting to lock its way into place with the NFL draft. But for the next month, it's all March, it's all college basketball. It is one of the best betting times of the years. And now that Selection Sunday is coming past, the bracket has been revealed. So, I mean, we might as well just hop right into it. Is there anything that was really surprising to you on Selection Sunday once brackets were revealed?
I think the thing that we've seen nationally, and even just from people that have caught just enough college basketball this year, that Virginia getting into a playing game is probably their best case scenario. And we saw last night how it ended up being a worst case scenario for them. And for honestly just being able to watch a good game of basketball. Obviously, we're looking at getting 4 more teams in over the next 2 days. But when you're talking Tony Bennett and college basketball, if you need something to watch to put yourself to sleep, last night's game that they lost was probably the biggest case against Virginia going forward. Unfortunately for them. So pretty much as long as Tony Bennett's coaching Virginia, they probably should not be allowed to play in the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, if I remember anything from past years of Virginia playing in the tournament, whether it's, when they had their number 1 seeded teams or even over the last couple of years where the standards have kind of dramatically gone a little bit down for Virginia, it's just that the pace of play has always been an absolute snail's pace. It's not pleasing to watch aesthetically at all. It makes me kind of sad to watch college basketball and just see the game moving at that slow of a pace. And we absolutely saw it in the result. 42 points in 40 minutes. That is just over 1 point a minute. It's some pretty piss poor resulting from there, and a pretty well-deserved exit in the first 4, if I do say so myself, right?
Yeah, and it's just a shame too, because obviously when you're doing these playing games, I have a huge issue with automatic qualifiers being in the playing game. They've earned the right to more than likely get blown out, because we saw yesterday with Wagner and Howard, they're both fighting for a 16 seed. They're probably going to lose. We can't say they are going to lose because now we actually have historical data, Virginia, saying otherwise, but it's just one of those things. They deserve the right to get blown out on a Thursday or Friday. These at-large teams, they're the ones that should be fighting for it. We saw exactly why Virginia was in that situation, even if they probably shouldn't have been. And it's good that they're out now. They didn't earn their way in. They didn't get in based on the committee and stuff like that. So please, going forward, make all these games just the at-large teams, because those are the ones that have had to probably work the hardest. Because as nice as it is to win your conference tournament, having a full body of games to work with too, not just an automatic qualifier, does make a difference for a lot of these teams.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But let's hop into today's playing games. We have Grambling State versus Montana State and Colorado against Boise State. I'm going to let you take the lead here. Why don't you start off with the Grambling State-Montana State matchup and tell me what you're trying to look at for that game?
So this game opened with Montana State getting money line and the spread. It's gone actually up in their favor a little bit, which is perfectly fine with me, because I think Grambling State can win this game outright. And you're getting it as high as plus 160 right now. It's anywhere between 145 and 160 on the money line to get them. I think that matters a lot because they're one of those teams. They're not like the little sibling, where they're just annoying and stuff, and they always just kind of, just dig at you until you finally give in. They're plenty talented to where they can play straight up with Montana State. It's just when it comes to a lot of those 50-50 moments, Grambling State has won those. And even as that can, just be switched, with the, flip of a coin, I just think it's one of those situations that where Grambling's weaknesses don't match Montana State's strengths. And I think this game ends up being closer than what you're seeing at -4 right now. So at that point, I'd rather just, take the plus money bet and get them at plus 160 as opposed to maybe getting them at like -110, -112 if you can get, +4 going forward.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to me that Grambling's coming in here on a nice little streak. They're 9-1 over the last 10 games, while the Bobcats are only 6-4 over their last 10. And Grambling is quietly a team that could definitely make a little bit of noise in the first round if they're able to make it out of this game. And they would have a matchup going up against Purdue, and as everyone's talked about, Purdue is definitely a team that has been picked to struggle, definitely the most out of the 1 seeds in this tournament. So I think Grambling matches up decently well against them, and wouldn't be shocked to see Grambling give them a run for their money if they're able to make it out. I think I would also be on Grambling in this matchup. They seem like a little bit better of a team than Montana State is right now. So I would definitely like taking that +4 and possibly even sprinkling on the money line as well.
Yeah, and the thing too, when you talk about Purdue, like one thing that they tend to struggle against are teams that are going to play at 100% the entire time, whether it's tempo or how they play defense, or if they're more man-based defenses and stuff. A team like that can give them trouble. Probably not like Grambling State can take them down, but at least they can give them, hopefully at least one good half, because Zach Edey, just having that height, you can't teach height, and
Yeah.
Grambling just doesn't have unfortunately the talent to match that at this point.
Yep, absolutely right. But let's move on to the other playing game here, and we have Boise State versus Colorado for a win for the 10 seed and the privilege to play the number 7 seed Florida in the first round. What do you like about this game?
I think it's close both ways. This is probably one of the better matchups of the first 4. It'll probably play better than Spencer versus Howard did yesterday, which was the close game, obviously. But I think the Big 12 being the best conference this year matters. I think Boise State is a very good team. The Mountain West probably should have more guaranteed teams in the tournament this year. But I think when it comes down to just the point spread is where I'm looking at. Is getting Colorado by essentially 1 possession, I think is going to be good enough. They have good guard play. Roddy Anderson of Boise State ended up getting benched in the Mountain West tournament. He just hasn't been exactly what they're looking for. That doesn't mean that can change this game, obviously, but Colorado's guard play is better. And one thing that has proven to be more effective in the NCAA tournament is guard play. And if I'm just looking at one reason to take one team over the other, it's going to be that in favor of Colorado, and getting it at 2.5 is a great number, because I think anything above 3, like a 1 possession game, is probably just a no bet situation for me.
Absolutely. Like that a lot. All right. So we talked about some of the first 4 games. But once those games are concluded, you're going to have a whole rush of people scrambling to fill out brackets, both for the rest of today, tonight, and tomorrow morning before brackets lock, I believe, around midday tomorrow Eastern time. So let's talk about some bracket picking strategies, some do's and don'ts, things that you're supposed to do. Your experience with NCAA tournaments, what is the first thing that you absolutely need to do when picking out your bracket?
Oh boy, probably pick out one that has the best interface. No, since we are a web-based world now, having a nice interface matters. No, but I think the one thing that I look for first is the overall seeding of each region. I think that plays a long way, because even though, like, we look at this year's bracket, like UConn is the number 1 overall seed, the way that region is seeded, that's not what a number 1 overall seed is usually going to get. Having Iowa State, Illinois, BYU, Auburn, and San Diego State, as in the top 6 with them, that's a lot of talent right there. And even the back half, we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but there's enough upset-minded teams that are also in that region. So that gives you a little bit more thought like, okay, maybe a different team other than UConn has a chance, even though UConn has been the best team for majority of the season, if not all of it. And then after that, I look at probably 5 through 7 seeds,
Mm.
who's more likely to fall based on where they're at. And then I just kind of go with, the better team beyond that, especially when you're talking anything past the Sweet 16. Then it really comes down to, do you just immediately look at it and feel like that's the better team? And then that's when you can add, the more educated stuff, whether it's, your own research or reading, your trusted sources.
Yeah, so one of the things I like to do when I start looking at my brackets and kind of deciding who to pick is not even just, looking at which teams I think are better. I like to use betting lines a lot to determine
Hmm.
that as well, because I think one of the biggest flaws with this process is a selection committee. I think it's very easy for them to get things wrong. I definitely think you get a lot of these mid majors that are underseeded and really should be seated higher against, some of these more Power Five conference teams that get a little bit more grace given their, kind of higher theoretical standing in the, NCAA community. So, a prime example is New Mexico versus Clemson, which we're going to
Hmm.
talk about a little bit later in the show. New Mexico is an 11 seed, but the betting market doesn't agree with them being an underdog to Clemson because Clemson's a 6 seed. They have New Mexico as 2.5-point favorites. Same thing with TCU, with them being 3.5-point favorites over Utah State. 10th seeded Drake is a 1.5-point favorite over Washington State, and you have a couple others as well. So I think looking for disparities like that, especially when like choosing to pick upsets, because upsets are a huge part of March Madness. We're
Hmm.
very rarely ever going to have a chalk bracket where every higher seed takes out the lower seed, because it just doesn't happen like that. This is, realistically, a lot of these games are going to be more on the 50-50 scale than people, care to admit.
Hmm.
And this is March. Literally anything can happen here. So that's a huge thing for me. I want to touch on pretty much one of the most popular, kind of theories when it comes to March Madness betting, which is that the one seeds are kind of just overpowered in a sense, and should logically always make at least the Elite Eight, if not the Final Four.
Hmm.
Is there ever a situation where you are just going to go straight out and pick a number one seed to lose, say in the round of 32?
There can be, and I think a lot of it goes beyond just player talent. I think at that point, you got to look at other tangible things like coaching. There's
Mm-hmm.
plenty of coaches that are very good, and there's plenty of coaches that are very good that don't know how to manage in game when it comes down to pressure situations. And whether that's during the regular season tournament, it can rear its ugly head. And I'm not I. It's very easy to point out Purdue because Matt Painter has struggled at times because a lot of times his emotion goes up and down during games. And that's okay. Like you'd rather know that he's alive than just kind of hanging out. But when a coach is struggling to adjust in game at halftime, and there's enough of a track record with that, then that's going to weigh more than just saying, oh, well, I like this 8 or 9 seed in the second round against them, just because this, that, or the other. There's plenty of reason to go into it. But I think when it comes down to those very good teams that we expect to go far, I think looking
Mm-hmm.
at their coaches probably should be a higher priority than what they are usually given.
Yeah, I definitely think coaches play like a really, really solid intangible role there, because, people don't really factor coaches in as much as they do in a sport like football, where I think they're a little bit more important to the game, like as a whole, with like game planning. And I think
Mhm.
basketball is a little bit more, just streamlined in that regard, but definitely plays a part in this where, the players are a lot younger. They're a lot more malleable to what the coaches tell them to do. And I think the strategy that the coach picks out could really play a part here. All right. So we've talked about some bracket picking strategy. We talked about the first four. It's time to get into our first round predictions. But obviously, want you guys to comment below on which bets of ours or Jeff's, for the most part, that you're tailing or fading. And let's get this tournament started with some winners. If you want to get into
it.
some of the betting action, make sure you head over to thegameday.com for all of our latest offers from DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, and so much more. And especially if you're in North Carolina, sports betting is now legal. And please take advantage of all of the offers at thegameday.com/news. You can find tons of promotions. We have tons of betting previews on every single round of 64 game out or going to be out in the next 24 to 48 hours. Over there, you can find so much betting content over at thegameday.com/news. But let's get into the Thursday games. What we're going to do is we're going to go to each region. We're going to pick out a game or two from each region that we like, and we're going to talk about some betting lines on it. So let's start in the West. Jeff, we told you guys that we were going to talk New Mexico versus Clemson, 11 versus 6 seed. Why don't you take us through that game?
So immediately after the brackets were announced, I go on betting sites, and only one of them had out anything beyond spread and over-unders. And I decided to look immediately at New Mexico Clemson, because if there's one thing that we saw in the Mountain West tourney is that New Mexico was more than fit, even as a 5 seed in there, to represent them with the AQ bid and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And this isn't their first rodeo. They're a very senior laden team and stuff. So when I go and I see the one site that has the money line, they're already the favorite. They opened as the favorites, and that is something you mentioned earlier. They even opened as 1.5 point favorites as well too. So across the board, this is what books were thinking of New Mexico. And since we're not looking at an upset, minded bet at that point, I decided to look a little further and potentially who New Mexico is going to face beyond that. So I wanted to make a bet on New Mexico to make the Sweet 16. And right now you can get them at plus 275 at Bet365 to make the Sweet 16, because if they get past Clemson, who's, again, more methodical, very much not up-tempo. They're very slow when they decide to play because they're deliberate in their actions. But if they get past them, they play Baylor, who's a team who shoots the three-point ball a lot. They have a very good offense, all right? So, it's very well known what they like to do when they're out there. But the problem is that their 3-point splits are pretty much the same as Clemson, despite them playing two different styles of basketball and stuff like that. They just have more talent. So if they're able to get past Clemson and get past that side of the ball, Baylor actually plays more of what they like to do, where they like to push the pace. They move in transition. They want to get to the basket quick. They want to find the first open guy. And then you add in their defense. New Mexico right now has 5 players that combine for over 7+ steals per game. And their rebounding is also easily in the top third in the teams in the tournament as well, too. So getting them at plus 275, with them already as a favorite in one game, they're going to be the underdog if they do play Baylor, because I expect Baylor to just house Colgate. Colgate comes in the Patriot League. They're rated the worst conference this year, according to KenPom. So once they dispose of Colgate, it's more than likely going to be New Mexico versus Baylor. And I still like New Mexico, even as a dog, to make it there and make it to the second weekend of the tournament.
Yeah, I really like it. One thing that's stuck out to me when doing some research for this was that New Mexico's defensive efficiency is really, really solid. They're in the top 50% of teams in this tournament in defensive efficiency, and their net rating is really high as well. It's 22nd, which is just very stupid high for a 22 seed, an 11 seed in this tournament. And it's better than Clemson's. Mm-hmm. They average more points a game. They average less points allowed per game. Their strength of schedule is only a couple places behind Clemson's as well, and they have the same record against top 25 teams this year. I mean, everything's kind of shaken up for New Mexico to kind of spring a nice upset here. So I'm absolutely with you there. Baylor's a team that's definitely shown some chinks in the armor at times this year. So if they get to a spot where they're playing Baylor in the round of 32 with the Sweet 16 trip on the line, I could absolutely see them springing another upset and being one of the few 11 seed teams to make the second weekend, because we do see a lot of these 11 seeds kind of make a run at least once every year for the past few years. We've seen a double-digit seed make a run. I see no reason why it can't be New Mexico, because that region is really suspect on all sides. I could easily see them make a run.
Yeah, I think North Carolina probably got the best draw if you're looking at a 1 seed to come out.
Hmm.
But in terms of 11-6 upsets, it's actually at a higher rate than the 12-5 upset that a lot of people like to target. Uh, since I think it was 2017 is where a lot of people are going, because you don't want to obviously go too far back, because 4-year rollovers and stuff like that. But yeah, like the 11 seed is winning at a 50% clip um, over the last I think it was 6 to 7 years.
All right. Before we move on to the next region, let's touch on one more upset-minded matchup that people are talking about, and it is St. Mary's Gales versus Grand Canyon, 5 versus 12. I know you have a note on Grand Canyon that you want to talk about, so why don't you go there?
Yeah, and this goes to everybody's going to target a 12-5, and the way that Grand Canyon has been playing with Bryce Drew as their head coach for the last handful of years, like, they deserve to be a 12 seed. They've been very good, even in a fairly irrelevant conference. Like, their handful of losses is great, but the problem is that they are now playing against a team that is exactly like them. They have more experience, they have more quad one wins. They're just a overall better team. And one thing that is crazy to think about, because of who St. Mary's tends to play in the West Coast Conference, they've lost once since December 23rd. That includes games against Gonzaga. That includes games against San Francisco. The West Coast Conference is a top-heavy conference, but all those teams at least had a say in whether or not they deserve to be in the tournament and stuff like that. And St. Mary's just going just nuts in conference play really does say something about them. And I think one of the teams that Grand Canyon probably didn't want to see was another mid-major that has the exact same mindset as them going into the tournament.
Yeah, definitely a good view there. So SMU to make the Sweet 16 plus 180 is definitely a nice look there. I think St. Mary's is definitely a strong team. I actually think they are definitely a sleeper to come out of that region. As the Final Four representative, could definitely be
Mhm.
interesting. All right, let's move on to the East region. We're talking number 3 Illinois versus number 14 Morehead State. Let's go through this matchup.
So just a note for people: I live 45 minutes away from Champaign, Illinois. I am in the middle of nowhere in Illinois, but it's a great thing because I've watched a lot of these games, and it's a unique Illinois team this year. They don't have like a true center. They have one that comes off the bench and stuff, but he's fine. Um, so seeing them play a quick up tempo game with a whole bunch of size and some dominant scores, and Marcus Damask and Terrence Shannon Jr. has been great. But as people have seen, especially when they're playing on Saturdays on ESPN or CBS, their defense can disappear very quickly. And that's an issue for a team that tries as hard as they do. And now they're going to face a team that has very good size for a mid-major with Morehead State. And they're also a team that likes to shoot the three at essentially the same clip as Illinois. There's been a lot of talk about Morehead State being a team that wants to shoot the three and such, but they only average one more attempt per game, and they make one more attempt per game than Illinois does. So it's going to come down to whether or not Morehead State can actually run their style of ball, which is very, very slow. But the difference is, unlike Virginia, they actually produce when they do it that way, because again, they have some size, and they did the opposite of what a lot of teams were doing in the Ohio Valley Conference. So if Morehead State can play at times in that quick up tempo Illinois play, but make their threes when they do it, the same way that Illinois has attempted multiple times, then the upset could very well happen. But I think getting Morehead State anywhere up to, I think, as low as 8.5, I think is worthwhile. Right now they're at plus 11.5 pretty much across all sports books. I think that's a bet that you should make, especially because you're still getting it at some places at minus 110. Anything up to 8.5, I think, makes sense, because Illinois has had trouble with slower teams, whether it's in the Big Ten or even a couple of years ago when they almost lost to 12 seed Chattanooga in the tournament. Those teams that like to play slow and then they're going to be matched pretty much, 1-for-1 on size, makes a difference. So it's going to come down to, are your best shooters going to shoot, and are they going to make it? And that's what carried Illinois to the Big Ten Conference tournament title. And that's going to be the big difference too, whether or not Morehead State can pull off this upset.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a really interesting matchup here. Just looking at it from like a bird's eye view, you see Morehead State's got a strength of schedule at 264th. out of all the teams. That's a little bit of a worrying stat for me when I'm looking at, to see who they played, just relative to their record. But they definitely have some weapons. The key is obviously going to be stopping Terrence Shannon for, Illinois. Being able to shut him down will mean everything in this game. I'm just not sure that they would. So, I think 8 points is enough to lay to the point where I could get on board with taking Illinois to cover this game. But I will say that, Illinois has looked suspect at times this year. It's just going to be how they come out looking in this game. I think taking it on its merits, I would be much more likely to take Illinois in this matchup, though. Do you think it's definitely, a good note that Morehead State is really good at slowing down the pace of play. And, that'll obviously be one of their major keys to keeping this game close.
Yeah, they're one of the bottom 100 teams in tempo, and they do it with players that probably could play at a higher tempo. They're just one of those teams that they play the way their coach asked them, and they've perfected it, which is great. And one last thing on Illinois, Brad Underwood is one of those coaches that isn't very good at in-game adjustments. He's never made it to the Sweet 16. So that is something to pay attention to, whether it's for this game or if you're looking at the round of 32 game that's going to be Saturday.
Guys, the former Andy Reid of college basketball. Let's go. All right. One quick note on the East. Why don't you tell us about Drake? We did touch on Drake, very, very slightly earlier on the show, but, tell us what you got on Drake here.
Yeah, this is a little bit more anecdotal, but the only Missouri Valley rep this year is the Drake Bulldogs, and that's because they went and just dominated the Valley for majority of the season. One thing that I found very interesting is that the MVC has won at least one game in every tournament for 10 straight years. And that's crazy. And only one of them has been better as a 7 seed. So that's pretty important to note. They are one of the best three-point shooting teams in this tournament, and they're also be playing close to home. They are an Iowa-based school, and they'll be in Omaha. So they get a Washington State team that's going to have to travel a little bit farther over a time zone difference, while a lot of fans for Drake can just drive to Omaha and head to Nebraska for that game. So I do find that interesting. And just being able to see Drake up close too, because again, living 45 minutes from Champaign, I also live 5 minutes away from where Illinois State plays. So a lot of those good MVC teams I do get to see pretty often as well too.
There you go, man. Follow those betting lines. Those betting lines will tell you everything you need to know. The selection committee does not tell the full story sometimes. All right, let's move on to the South Division here. We have a matchup that's pretty going to be one of the most popular round of 64 matchups. I've already bet one side of this myself. I'll tell you why after you give us yours. It's 11 seeded NC State versus number 6 Texas Tech, and NC State is currently +5.
Yeah, you can get that at DraftKings and Bet365. Majority is 4.5. But if you're going to give me that, I don't even care if I don't get the hook on it at 5.5. I want that at 5, in part because NC State is playing faster than they have in the past. And I think that matters. It mattered when they won 5 games in 5 days in tournament play. And it's crazy. And the good thing is they don't get a lot of rest, but they get to play in Pittsburgh. And again, location does matter for some of these teams. NC State only having to go up a couple of states. It's much more palatable than Texas Tech. For a lot of people who don't know, it takes a long time to drive through Texas. And while they're going to be flying, getting fans there, it's going to be a lot tougher. I think hot shooting does matter for some teams, especially when you're a lower seed. And then when you add in the Wolfpack hot shooting on top of Texas Tech potentially being without 2 players, including their center, Warren Washington, I think that matters a lot more than I think they're getting credit for, because I think if books were giving that just a little bit more, they may know more about whether or not these guys are going to play a full workload or not. I think it'd be closer to probably like 3.5 or 4, that type of thing. But with everybody being so hush-hush at the moment with injuries to Washington and then shooting guard Darius Williams, I think it does matter for NC State, especially if they can keep the tempo where they want it. And, of course, their shooting may not be as lights out as it was, but all it has to do is be 75% of that, and they have a realistic shot at upsetting Texas Tech. And I think that's good enough to cover the 5 points.
Yeah, I also took this. I grabbed it at 5.5 a couple days ago. It was one of my first bets that I made once the brackets were announced. I just can't shake how good NC State looked romping through the ACC tournament. Like they looked absolutely stellar. It dispatched every team that it also included Duke and UNC.
Mm-hmm.
Those are two top 4 seeds in this tournament. I mean, like they've just looked really good. They stifled every bit of competition. Like that's big. That's big game hunting, for me.
Mm-hmm.
And that covers a lot of ground for me, and it can make up for a lot in other areas as well. The Warren Washington injury is a tough one for me to overlook. This is not, the Chris Beard Texas Tech team of old that could overcome, some adversity like this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really not sure this squad is that built to overcome a loss as big as Washington's would be. And again, the Williams injury and, status will be interesting to look at as well. Again, guys, don't forget to go to thegameday.com. Check out all of our betting insights on these games, all of our offers on DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, Bet365, all of the others as well there. We're going to have stuff up all week. You can check it out over at thegameday.com/news for all of our betting promos and best bets on these. But yes, NC State going to be one of my favorite upsets. Again, it's another 11 seed that I am picking to upset the 6 seed. I'm pretty sure I picked 3 of 4 in this year's. I'm all about those upsets, baby.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to go with that. And, it's going to be really interesting to see what NC State's able to do, because I think they have the potential to really make some noise here. They have a possible, like, really tough round of 32 matchup against Kentucky. And then if they make it even further, Marquette's going to be a really tough out if they have Kolek back at full strength. But NC State can make some noise, man. I absolutely love the way, their makeup, and their team, just bonding and chemistry looks right now. Really looking forward to seeing them. Let's touch on one more South news with some Marquette talk before we go to the Midwest Conference.
Yeah, so obviously the big news, Tyler Kolek, he's missed a significant amount of time for Marquette, and it cost the Golden Eagles in the Big East tournament. There is talk that he is going to be playing in the first round, which is great for Marquette, and it's great for you if you are at Bet365, because right now, as the 2 seed, you would think that, Marquette would probably have, much longer, juiced odds to get to the Sweet 16. Right now, it's -130 at Bet365 because of the uncertainty of Tyler Kolek. And because of that, I would take that up to -200 at this point, because even if he were to miss round 1 against Western Kentucky, which could be a close game without him, he could be back in time for the second round game if they were to win. And at that point, then, too, you're looking at, again, similar odds, to make it to the Sweet 16, but they're going to have a lot tougher opponent, whether it's Florida, Colorado, or Boise State. But I think as long as he's on the court and contributes something in the first round, I think this is a steal of a number, considering that most 1 and 2 seeds are going to have much, much worse odds to bet when you're looking at advancing to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I think with a healthy Tyler Kolek, Marquette is almost borderline unstoppable.
Mm-hmm.
So, it'll absolutely be, fascinating to see his health. That one -130 is a bet that I've already made. So, definitely on there. All right, let's stop in the Midwest region for our last region before we jump on out of here. We got number 8 Utah State versus number 9 TCU. And again, this is another one of those lines where the lower seeded team is the favorite. And it's not a small number here, 3.5 point favorite for TCU. You can get that over at BetMGM. So give us your scoop on this game.
I think I'm not going to say it's a misseeding, because TCU was a flawed team this year, and Utah State obviously plays the type of ball that is not always fun to watch. But it's just one of those things where it's just these teams are essentially 55-45 to win. Any way you want to look at it, leaning towards the 8 versus 9 is probably how you would look at it anyways. But I think at -3.5, I think TCU's entire portfolio makes it just more palatable to take them at that number. Obviously, Utah State could, cover this, but I just think that TCU from top to bottom, like the talent and physicality that they play with, is what kept them, in the top half of the Big 12 all season.
Yep.
The one thing that may cost them, though, is coaching. I don't want to harp on these guys because they've obviously done really good, but Jamie Dixon has a very long history of not covering.
Yeah.
He's 10-18 straight up overall. That's really bad. I don't think that affects him as much in this game, but even if he doesn't cover that, he's 6-15 against the spread as a favorite too. So like it's even worse. But like I just like TCU that much this round before they potentially just get bludgeoned after that. But I just think that until this number crosses 4, I just think that the overall size and just their ability to have hanged with so many good teams for so long makes a difference too. And again, it's just another one of those teams that does like to play faster. And when you can do that and your defense doesn't suffer from it, I'm going to give you a little bit of an edge in that point, especially when we're talking 8-9, where it really can be a more of a 50-50 coin flip game.
Yeah, I absolutely agree here. I also think TCU is the better team in this matchup. Whoever wins is going to get a realistically very winnable matchup against. We're gonna assume that Purdue, as the 1 seed, is going to dispatch the winner of the Montana State Grambling game,
Mm-hmm.
the 16th seed. So whoever wins this game gets a nice matchup against Purdue. Realistically, all you have to do is shut down Zach Edey, and you can win that game. So, definitely an interesting matchup to look at here, looking ahead to see who gets to play Purdue in that second round here. One more stop with the Midwest Conference here. Let's talk Creighton, because they are probably one of the best teams in this tournament. They're in a conference where they can realistically win very easily, and they are definitely living by the 3-point shot here.
Yeah, and I think that's something that could be very bad. I don't know how bad it'll be in the first round against Akron, but it's another one of those 3-14 matchups that looks better on paper than maybe it might be. And part of that is Creighton's own undoing, because they have some bad losses at home this year. Like, you want to talk about distinct home court advantages. It's teams like Creighton, Utah State, who now has to, obviously go into more of a neutral setting. Like those teams, when they lose at home, it's notable. And Creighton losing against 2 inferior opponents very late in the season before tournament play does stick out. And as odd as it sounds, John Gross, who unfortunately I know from his time at Illinois as well too, as mid-majors, Ohio and Akron, 6-1 in the tournament in the first 2 rounds. That is not nothing. Especially when you're talking about, the one loss coming at Illinois, but on top of that, like he's got wins. He's got some skins on the wall, and he's got this Akron team playing good at the right time. Again, they are a 14 seed for a reason, because they should not have been in the tournament. They won, the MAC outright, getting the AQ, and that's why they're in there. But again, hot shooting, like a team like NC State, gives credence to a team like Akron that's playing well for their coach, and a coach that has a good resume, even if it is smaller, because he's mainly a mid-major coach. And I think Creighton is on upset watch. I would still take them, more often than not. But again, it's one of those things. If you can get Akron at a high enough double-digit, underdog spread, it's well worth, at least 1 unit type of play to go with Akron, even if you think that Creighton can win, because I still think that a team like Akron has the ability, because of the coaching, to at least cover a spread.
Yeah, I will say I did the best bets and betting promos piece for this over on thegameday.com. And one thing that I realized is that if Creighton is not hitting their patented corner threes with, relative ease, things could be difficult for them in this game. So, they have a lot of scorers in that game, on that team. It'll be interesting to try and slow some of them down, but I definitely think Akron can keep this within 15 points. So I did take the plus 14 there with them, and it'll be interesting to see. I think it'll be a little bit of a closer game. I wouldn't go as far as to pick them to win by any measure, but they absolutely have a shot here. All right, before we get on out of here and we wrap this up until we come back on Saturday for round of 32 previews, who do you have winning the March Madness tournament? Because that's what everyone wants to know, right?
Good God, that's way too much pressure, because I'm one of those people, I 11th hour is when I get like a bracket done. But if I'm looking just straight up, if UConn can come out of the East and if they win their Elite Eight game and it's comfortable, like 8+ points, anything beyond that, a couple of shots fall and things change. But I think UConn, if they come out with a convincing win in the Elite Eight, is probably going to win. But if not them, like I think 2 seeds like Tennessee deserve more consideration. I think that they're probably my favorite to come out of the Midwest right now, just because of injuries to certain teams. But I would probably go UConn or Tennessee if we're looking at one team from each side of the bracket. So they would probably face off in the championship game for me, and I would lean UConn at that point just because of the road they have to face to get to the championship game.
Yeah. So I haven't finished making my brackets, all of them yet, but I do have one bracket in. It is my home league bracket. We do a bracket challenge every year. It ends up being about 25 guys, $50 buy-in. So there's some decent payouts in it. I won it a few years ago. I took UConn over. Yeah. Humble subtle flex there. I took UConn over Duke. I actually am a big Duke fan this year. I do think that they have a shot. And look, I'm fading Houston simply because Mattress Mac is on Houston. So I don't have a huge reason to fade Houston, but that is my reason to fade Houston. I always fade Mattress Mac. Typically it works out for me really well, monetarily wise. So we'll see what happens there. I do think, Duke has the potential to make a run. I think people have, kind of soured on them a little bit, but I love Kyle Filipowski. I love, what he's able to do on a basketball court.
Tripping
and I do think, this generation's Grayson Allen. I do think that, they're not given as much respect as they should be. So Duke and UConn are in my finals. I got Gonzaga and Arizona as my other 2 representatives, but I would also probably go UConn. I mean, this feels like a weird year where anybody can win, but UConn does feel like they've kind of set themselves apart from the other 63 teams in this bracket. But thank you guys all for tuning in to this first episode of the March Madness style of Better Plays Ahead. Want you guys to go in the comments on YouTube and drop down who you think is going to win this year's March Madness tournament. And we will see you back here Saturday morning, 10-ish a.m. Eastern time, to break down the round of 32.